The morning Marcus found his 7-year-old daughter sitting at the edge of her bed, staring at her own legs like they had betrayed her, was the morning his entire world cracked open down the middle. She had woken up screaming at 3 a.m., and by sunrise, Clara couldn't feel anything below her waist. Not the cold hardwood floor. Not her father's trembling hands wrapping around her small feet. Not the warmth of the blanket he pulled over her knees while whispering promises he didn't yet know how to keep. The doctors at St. Vincent's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio used words like idiopathic and acute inflammatory and uncertain prognosis, and every syllable felt like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples of dread through Marcus's chest that never quite settled. He was 34 years old, a single father, a man who fixed other people's broken pipes for a living, and now he was being told that his daughter, his reason for breathing, might never walk again. If you believe that kindness can move mountains, and that love is sometimes the only medicine that truly heals, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like Clara's deserve to be heard by every corner of the world. Marcus had been raising Clara alone since she was 18 months old, the year her mother, Renee, lost her battle with a heart condition that had gone undetected for most of her short life. He had learned to braid hair by watching YouTube tutorials at midnight. He had learned to pack lunches that looked like other kids' lunches so Clara wouldn't feel different. He had learned to cry only in the shower, so she would never see how scared he really was. But nothing, not one sleepless night, not one grief-soaked morning, had prepared him for this. Clara had always been the kind of child who ran everywhere. She didn't walk into a room, she burst into it. She didn't climb stairs, she flew up them. To watch her now, seated in a hospital-issued wheelchair, her small hands folded in her lap with a stillness that didn't belong to her, was the kind of pain that lives below words. The specialists they consulted over the following 3 months represented the pinnacle of American medicine. A neurologist in Cleveland whose waiting list was 8 months long agreed to see Clara after Marcus called every single day for 6 weeks. A pediatric specialist in Chicago with a reputation built on decades of research and a wall full of diplomas examined her for 4 hours and concluded that the inflammation affecting her spinal cord was complex, treatment-resistant, and likely to be permanent. A team at a renowned research hospital in Boston ran tests that cost more than Marcus made in a year, tests covered only partially by insurance, tests that left him with a second mortgage on a house he'd already been struggling to keep. They tried 3 rounds of aggressive steroid therapy. They tried experimental 4 infusions. They consulted with colleagues overseas, pulled case studies from medical databases, and shook their heads in the gentle, practiced way that powerful men shake their heads when they've reached the end of what their power can do. None of it moved Clara's legs. She turned 8 in the hospital. Marcus brought a chocolate cake with yellow frosting because yellow was her favorite color, the color of sunflowers, she always said, the color of happy. He sat beside her bed and sang to her in his off-key, unashamed way, and she laughed, and for a few minutes the room felt like it belonged to them and not to the disease. But when the candles were blown out and the lights came back on, the wheelchair was still there in the corner, patient and terrible, waiting. It was Clara's physical therapist, a warm and quietly determined woman named Patricia, who changed everything. Patricia had been working with Clara 3 times a week for 2 months, doing what she could within the limits of her prescribed treatment plan, when she pulled Marcus aside one Thursday afternoon. She told him about a man she'd heard of, not a billionaire, not a famous specialist, not someone whose name appeared in research journals. His name was Thomas Greer, a retired physical therapist in his mid-60s who lived 40 minutes outside Columbus in a small town called Waverly. He had spent 30 years developing a method he called neuromuscular repatterning, a painstaking, deeply personalized approach that combined movement therapy, hydrotherapy, and something he simply described as listening to what the body is still trying to say. He didn't advertise. He didn't have a website. He had a phone number, a converted barn behind his house, and a waiting list of families who had found him the same way Marcus did, through a whisper passed between desperate, loving people. Marcus called that same evening. Thomas answered on the 3rd ring, asked him a handful of quiet questions, and said, bring her Saturday. What followed was 4 months of something that looked, to an outside observer, almost unremarkable. Thomas worked with Clara for 2 hours every Saturday and 2 hours every Wednesday, moving slowly, never forcing, talking to her the entire time in a low, unhurried voice about everything except her legs, about birds, about her favorite books, about what she wanted to be when she grew up. He told Marcus that the body sometimes needed to be reminded of who it was before the injury. That healing wasn't always loud. That sometimes the nervous system needed to be approached the way you'd approach a frightened child, gently, patiently, without agenda. Marcus drove those 40 minutes each way without missing a single session. He sat in the converted barn on an old wooden chair and watched a man with rough hands and kind eyes do what hospitals full of expensive equipment had not been able to do. He watched Thomas place Clara's feet flat on the floor and ask her to think about walking, not to try, just to think. He watched Clara close her eyes with the concentration of someone listening for a sound just below the threshold of hearing. 6 weeks in, Clara's left foot moved on its own. It was small. It was barely a twitch. But Marcus saw it, and Thomas saw it, and Clara felt it. She opened her eyes with an expression Marcus had never seen on her face before, something between astonishment and recognition, like she had heard a voice she thought she'd lost. He pressed his hand over his mouth and held his breath so he wouldn't sob out loud and break the moment apart. He failed. He sobbed anyway, and Thomas put a hand on his shoulder and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The progress was not instant. There were weeks where nothing changed, and Marcus would drive home in silence with Clara asleep in the back seat and sit in his parked car in the driveway for long minutes before he could make himself go inside. But he went back. Every Wednesday, every Saturday. And the weeks where nothing changed were followed by weeks where something did, a tremor in her right knee, a reflex that hadn't been there before, a morning when Clara called from her room not with fear but with pure, electric excitement, because she had pulled herself to standing by gripping her bedpost and her legs had held for 3 full seconds before giving way. The day Clara took her first steps, it was a Wednesday afternoon in March. The Ohio sky outside the barn's high windows was the pale gray of old photographs, and the space heater in the corner clicked and hummed. Thomas had placed 2 parallel handrails 4 feet apart, the kind used in basic rehabilitation work, simple and wooden and worn smooth by other hands before Clara's. He asked her to hold them and just try to move forward. And Clara, who had stopped asking why things were hard and started simply meeting them, Clara pushed off and moved her right foot forward, and then her left, and then her right again, 3 shuffling, shaking, magnificent steps, before Marcus crossed the room in what felt like no time at all and caught her in his arms. He didn't kneel down gracefully. He collapsed. His knees hit the floor and his arms went around her and he buried his face in her hair and wept with every part of himself, with relief that had been wound tight for so many months it had forgotten how to uncoil, with gratitude so large it had no shape, with the specific and indescribable joy of a parent who has watched their child fight for something as fundamental as the ground beneath their feet and win. Clara patted his back the way children do when adults cry, small rhythmic pats that mean I've got you, and that undid him completely. Thomas stood back and let them have every second of it. 3 months later, Clara walked into her 3rd grade classroom at Riverside Elementary in Columbus, Ohio, on her own 2 feet, carrying a backpack covered in sunflower patches. Her teacher cried. 2 other parents who had gathered in the hallway that morning cried. Marcus stood at the door and watched her find her seat and pull out her pencil case with the easy confidence of someone who knows exactly where she belongs, and he thought about Renee, and about Thomas, and about every impossible thing love had somehow made possible. If this story moved something in you, if Clara's courage or Marcus's love touched your heart in any way, please like this video right now, share it with one person who needs to believe in something today, and leave a comment below telling us what part of this story stayed with you. Before this story ends, we want to ask you something simple and sincere. Drop the word sunflower in the comments below. Let it be a quiet signal between everyone watching this, a reminder that healing is possible, that love is sometimes the most powerful medicine, and that ordinary people can do what the world says is impossible. There is a version of